At 10:47 p.m., I heard 3 slow knocks coming from the 3rd floor of my college. The problem was, that entire floor had been locked for months. I never thought there was anything strange about my college. During the day, it was just like any other university. Students everywhere. People rushing between classes. Professors complaining about deadlines. Nothing unusual, but at night, the building felt completely different. Almost empty, almost silent, and one night, I learned that it wasn't as empty as I thought. I was in my 2nd year of college at the time. I had a big exam coming up, and I had been putting off studying for almost 2 weeks. So one evening, I decided to stay late and study in the library. Most students had already left by around 9 p.m. By 10, there were only a few people left in the entire building. I remember looking around the library and realizing how quiet everything had become. The only sound was the air conditioning and the occasional buzzing of the fluorescent lights. Around 10:30, I heard footsteps outside. I looked up. Someone was walking down the hallway. I could hear the footsteps getting closer, then they stopped. I waited for someone to walk into the library. Nobody did. After a few seconds, I went back to studying. I didn't think much of it, until I heard the footsteps again. This time, they were coming from the opposite direction, slowly, one step at a time. I looked toward the library entrance, nothing, then I heard something that made me stop reading. A door slammed somewhere upstairs. I knew the sound immediately. It was the old lecture hall on the 3rd floor. That part of the building had been closed for months because of renovations. Students weren't supposed to go up there. I tried to ignore it, but about 10 minutes later, I heard another sound, someone running. The footsteps came from upstairs and moved quickly across the hallway. Then they stopped. I looked at my phone. 10:47 p.m. At that point, I decided I was done studying. I packed my things and left the library. The hallway was completely empty. I walked toward the stairs. As I reached the 1st floor, I noticed something strange. The lights above me were still on, but the lights on the 3rd floor were completely dark. I started walking toward the main entrance, then I heard it. 3 knocks. From upstairs, I stopped. 3 slow knocks. I remember thinking that someone might still be working inside the building. So I decided to check. I don't know why. Looking back, it was probably the dumbest decision I could have made. I walked back toward the stairs. The building was so quiet that I could hear my own footsteps. I reached the 2nd floor, nothing. I continued toward the 3rd. When I reached the top of the stairs, I saw something lying on the floor. A backpack. It was sitting directly outside the old lecture hall. I knew that hallway was supposed to be locked. I also knew the backpack wasn't there when I walked past earlier. I walked closer. There was no name on it. No identification, nothing. Then I noticed the door to the lecture hall was slightly open. I stood there for a few seconds. I didn't want to go inside. But then I heard a noise, a chair moving, from inside the room. I immediately stepped back. Then someone whispered, "Hello." I froze. The voice sounded like a student. A young man. I almost answered, but something about the voice felt wrong. It sounded like it was coming from the very back of the room. I slowly pushed the door open. The room was completely dark. I used my phone flashlight. Rows of empty desks. A whiteboard. Old posters on the walls. Nothing else. I walked inside. "Is anyone here?" No answer. Then I noticed something on the whiteboard. There was writing on it, one sentence. "You shouldn't be here." I remember feeling my stomach drop. I immediately turned around. The door was closed. I was certain I had left it open. I walked toward it. Before I could reach the handle, I heard footsteps behind me. 1, 2, 3, slow footsteps coming from the back of the room. I turned around. Nothing. I pointed my flashlight toward the desks. Nothing. Then my phone flashlight flickered. For a second, the entire room went dark. When the light came back, there was someone standing at the very back of the classroom. I couldn't see their face. They were just standing there, completely still. I thought it was another student, so I said, "Hey, are you okay?" The person didn't answer. Instead, they slowly raised one hand and pointed toward the door. I turned around. The door was open again. I didn't wait to find out why. I ran. I sprinted down the hallway, down the stairs, and straight toward the main entrance. I didn't even stop to get my backpack. When I reached the lobby, I saw the security guard sitting behind the desk. I told him there was someone upstairs. He looked at me strangely. Then he asked, "What person?" I explained what happened. He listened without saying anything. Then he told me something I didn't expect. He said the third floor had been locked all week. He had the only key, and nobody had signed into the building after 8 p.m. I asked him about the backpack. He said there shouldn't be one. Then he called another security guard. They went upstairs together. I stayed in the lobby. About 10 minutes later, they came back. They weren't carrying a backpack. They weren't carrying anything. I asked what they found. The guard just said nothing. I thought it was over, until the next morning. I went back to the university to get my backpack. I asked a professor about the old lecture hall. He told me something that I still think about. Years earlier, before I attended the college, a student had been found unconscious inside that room late at night. Nobody ever really explained what happened. The student survived, but according to the professor, he refused to ever enter that room again. I asked him if the room had always been closed. He said no. It had only been closed recently. Then he looked at me and asked, "Why are you asking about that room?" I didn't tell him what happened. I just said I had heard noises upstairs. He stared at me for a few seconds. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Don't stay here after dark." I stopped studying at the university after that. I started leaving before sunset. A few weeks later, I walked past the third floor hallway during the day. The lecture hall was still locked, but there was something written on the whiteboard behind the glass window in the door. I couldn't read all of it, but I could make out for words. "You came back again?" I never told anyone what I saw that night, and I still don't know who was inside that room, but to this day, I never walked through an empty university building after dark. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to decide whether I should leave. The room felt strangely cold, not the normal kind of cold you would expect from an old classroom. It felt like the temperature had suddenly dropped. I could see my breath. I looked around again. There were probably 20 desks in the room, all covered in a thin layer of dust. But one of them looked different. The chair was pulled out, and the desk looked completely clean, as if someone had been sitting there recently. I slowly walked toward it. There was a notebook lying on top of the desk. I didn't touch it. I just stared at it. The cover was completely black. No name, no writing, nothing. Then I heard a quiet sound behind me. A chair scraping across the floor. I turned around immediately. Every chair was exactly where it had been, except the one closest to the door. It was now facing me. I stood completely still. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then I heard 3 quiet knocks, not from the door. From inside the wall beside me, 3 slow knocks. I stepped away from the wall. That's when I noticed the whiteboard. There was something written on it. One sentence, "You shouldn't be here."